Have you ever had to make a decision where absolutely everything felt at stake? A choice with no good options, only different paths to disaster, and the weight of the world seemed to rest on your shoulders. Think for a moment about the most intense pressure you have ever faced. Now multiply it by 1 billion. That is where our story begins. Picture the scene. It is a crisp October morning in 1962. The world goes about its routine, immersed in the Cold War's veiled tension, yet unaware of the abyss opening just miles off the American coast. In the White House, a heavy electric silence fills the Oval Office. President John F. Kennedy, a man trained to project calm and control, stares at photographs that defy logic and ignite fear in its purest form. The images, captured by a U-2 spy plane, are unequivocal. They show launch ramps, silos, and Soviet ballistic missiles being installed on Cuban soil, only 145 kilometers from Florida. This was not a distant threat or an abstract political maneuver. It was nuclear apocalypse, assembled and ready to deliver in less than 13 minutes. Cities like Washington, New York, and Miami could be turned into radioactive ash before the defense system had time to react. The doomsday clock was no longer hypothetical. It was real, and its hands were moving mercilessly in the Caribbean. What followed were the 13 most dangerous days in human history, a period when a single wrong word, a single misread gesture, could have been our collective end. But this is not only a story about missiles and military maneuvers, it is a deep journey into human psychology under excruciating pressure. It is about how a leader and his team, surrounded by fear, uncertainty, and voices calling for immediate war, had to fight an even greater battle inside their own minds. Have you ever felt paralyzed by analysis, with multiple voices giving contradictory advice in a moment of crisis? That was their situation on a global scale. The critical decision they faced did not involve only military strategy. It demanded absolute mastery of persuasion engineering and strategic influence. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because the weapon that saved the world was not a bigger bomb, but a deep understanding of the opponent's mind. Stay with me on this journey, because we are going to open the doors to the White House's and the Kremlin's secret rooms. We will decode the tension, the bluffs, and the psychological tactics at work behind the scenes, while the rest of the world held its breath, not knowing if there would be a tomorrow. The question hanging in the air was not only what to do, but how to think. How do you avoid the trap of impulsive reaction? How do you persuade an enemy to back down without humiliating him, avoiding a fury that could set the planet on fire? The answers to these questions changed the course of history. And it all began with the arrival of those photographs, with the sudden and terrifying realization that the abyss was no longer a metaphor. It was a geographic and imminent reality. As soon as those images were confirmed, the White House became a command center for a silent war. A hand-picked group of the nation's most powerful men was summoned in absolute secrecy. They called themselves ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. There, in that room, the fate of the world would be weighed, debated, and decided. Decorated generals, chests full of medals and mines forged on the battlefield, presented their plans. Military logic was cold, direct, and brutal. A swift and overwhelming airstrike to destroy the missiles before they went operational, followed by a full invasion of Cuba. To them, anything else would signal weakness, an invitation to even greater aggression. The pressure on Kennedy to authorize action was crushing, coming from men he respected and trusted. This is where I ask you to pause and connect with that feeling. Maybe not on a global scale, but in your life. Have you been in a room, or even in an inner dialogue, where the loudest, most confident voices pushed you toward a decision that, deep down, felt wrong? That impulse to respond to pressure with more pressure is profoundly human. If this reflection on critical decisions resonates with you, share in the comments what has struck you the most so far. Reading your stories and perspectives is incredible, and it builds a community of people who, like us, seek to understand the engineering of persuasion in depth. Your participation truly is the fuel that moves this channel. When you like the video, the algorithm understands that this kind of deep analysis matters and shows it to more people who can benefit from this conversation. And if you want to continue this journey with us, to uncover together the psychology behind history's greatest decisions and learn to apply it in our lives, consider subscribing. Every subscription is a vote of confidence, a signal that we are on the right path, building something valuable together. That crushing pressure inside XCOM was exactly the first psychological trap Kennedy needed to disarm. Yielding to the Hawks was the easy path, the choice that would relieve the immediate tension. But Kennedy was haunted by a far more powerful question. What if the first bullet, the first missile, was not the end of the problem, but the beginning of the end of the world? He saw in his general's eyes the certainty, the conviction that force was the only language the enemy would understand. But behind the scenes of his own mind, a hidden truth disturbed him. Kennedy was in the middle of a reading that would have a profound impact on his decisions. The book, The Guns of August, which details how Europe plunged into the First World War, not through a grand evil plan, but through a succession of arrogant small decisions, miscalculations, and leaders' stubborn inability to step back. He saw history about to repeat itself on a thermonuclear scale. The transformation he needed to create was not on the battlefield, but in the mindset of that room. It was a solitary journey against a chorus of voices that saw caution as weakness and diplomacy as surrender. With every passing hour, the pressure to act increased, and the road to war seemed not only the most likely, but the only possible path. Now let me go even deeper, because what was at stake there was the very definition of power. Is power the capacity to annihilate your opponent, or the strength to resist the impulse to do so? Kennedy began to search for a third course, an alternative that was not on the table, a solution that was neither fight nor flight. These insights did not come from military manuals, but from deep, emotional, and strategic intelligence. He understood that to avoid apocalypse, more weapons were not enough. A different mindset was required. He needed a move that would redefine the board, change the rules of that deadly confrontation, a demonstration of strength that did not involve firing a single shot. That search for an elegant exit was his real battle, fought in the silence of his thoughts while the world barely knew it stood at the edge of an abyss. If this analysis about decision pressure and the search for a new mindset resonates with you, write in the comments. The truest strength is control. After all, how do you demonstrate power and resolve a crisis without starting a war? The answer to that question was not in any war manual. It was in psychology, in the subtle art of persuasion. Kennedy's solution was a masterpiece of strategic influence, a move that changed the course of the crisis and demonstrated a different kind of power. He refused to accept the two catastrophic options on the table, attack or do nothing. Instead, he created a third door. That was his great mindset shift. Behind the scenes, while the generals sharpened their swords, Kennedy's team crafted a response that was, at its core, a message. The genius lay in the choice of a single word. He did not announce a naval blockade, because in international law, a blockade is an unequivocal act of war, which would give the Soviets legal justification for immediate retaliation. The impact would be devastating. Instead, he presented to the world a quarantine, a softer, almost medical word. It conveyed firmness and control, but not aggression. It was a barrier, not an attack. This decision was not a mere semantic detail. It was the hidden truth of Kennedy's strategy, a psychological weapon aimed not at ships, but at the mind of one man, Nikita Khrushchev. Now let me go deeper, because that word choice was designed to give Khrushchev something the American generals did not want him to have: time and space to think. A declaration of war corners an opponent and forces him to react based on instinct and pride. A quarantine, on the other hand, creates a dilemma. It transfers the pressure. The next decision, the next move that could lead the world to war, would no longer be Kennedy's, but the Soviet leaders, who would have to decide whether to try to break that line. It was a spectacular inversion of power. Kennedy was, in practice, inviting his adversary to a dangerous dance of nerves in the middle of the ocean, yet a dance that still allowed the possibility of retreat without total humiliation. It was the first of many revelations in this journey, showing that the control of narrative is as important as control of the battlefield. It was the beginning of a complex operation to influence, not annihilate, the enemy. If using language as a tool of power makes sense to you, comment, "The word is a weapon." But that brilliant move by itself was no guarantee. How do you ensure your opponent will understand the message the way you intended? The answer lies in one of the most powerful and yet most underestimated principles of strategic influence: empathy. Not empathy in the sense of pity or agreement, but tactical empathy. The ability to put yourself in the other's place to understand the world from his perspective. Behind the scenes at the White House, one of the most important transformations of the Cold War took place. Kennedy and his team, led by his brother Robert, began a journey to decode the mind of Nikita Khrushchev. They stopped seeing him only as the caricatured, unpredictable leader of the Soviet Union and started asking what he really wanted, what he feared, and what pressures he was under at home. That shift in mindset was the hidden truth that enabled the next step. They realized that Khrushchev, like Kennedy, was trapped. He had made a bold and risky bet, and now he could not simply back down without suffering a humiliation that could cost him his position and perhaps his life. The impact of that perception was immense. The goal was no longer to defeat Khrushchev, but to help him find a path out of the crisis he had created. A path that allowed both sides to save face. Now let me go deeper, because this empathy strategy was about to be tested in the most dramatic and confusing way possible. As tension in the waters around Cuba reached a peak, with Soviet ships approaching the quarantine line, something unexpected happened in Moscow. Messages began arriving in Washington that seemed to come from two completely different people, even though both had the same sender. First came a long personal letter, almost an emotional outpouring from Khrushchev, offering a deal. Hope filled the XCOM room. Soon afterward, another message arrived, this time public by radio, with a hard official tone and far greater demands. Chaos set in. Which message was true? The man or the regime? If the power of stepping into the other side's shoes to resolve a conflict makes sense to you, comment. Empathy is strategy. Kennedy's team faced a psychological riddle. Which Khrushchev should they negotiate with? The terrified man or the unyielding dictator? The answer to that question would determine whether there would be a third world war. In the XCOM room, confusion gave way to panic. The general's militaristic logic shouted that the second harsher letter was the enemy's true face, a bluff that demanded a matching response. To them, the first letter was a sign of weakness to be exploited. But Kennedy's team, immersed in that journey of strategic empathy, had one of the most brilliant insights of the entire crisis. They understood the hidden truth behind those two messages. They were not contradictory. They were two sides of the same coin, the man and the leader, fighting an internal battle. The first letter was Khrushchev, the man, terrified of annihilating the world. The second was Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, pressured by Kremlin hardliners, needing to project strength. At that moment, they made the boldest and most psychologically ingenious decision of the entire confrontation, a move historians call the trollop maneuver. They decided, consciously, to ignore the second letter, to pretend it never existed. Now let me go deeper, because this was not a passive decision. It was an act of absolute narrative control. By responding only to the first, more emotional and conciliatory letter, Kennedy was, in practice, extending his hand to the part of Khrushchev that wanted peace. He was saying, "I choose to negotiate with the man, not the regime. I see your search for a way out, and I will help you build it." The impact of that decision was monumental. It was a total bet on psychology, a demonstration that they understood the pressure their opponent was under. It was the final shift from a confrontation mindset to a problem-solving mindset. That audacious choice to focus on hope rather than threat opened the door to de-escalation, showing that behind great decisions, what you choose to ignore can be as powerful as what you choose to answer. If the idea of choosing which version of your opponent to engage with impressed you, comment, "I choose the narrative." But answering the right letter was not enough to guarantee peace. One final piece was missing. The secret offer that would give Khrushchev the victory he needed to justify withdrawal. That final offer could not be made publicly. An explicit trade of missiles for missiles would make America look weak, undermining Kennedy's authority and NATO's credibility. The solution once again took place behind the scenes, away from the public eye and even from most ex-com advisors. On a Saturday night, at the height of tension, the president's brother, Robert Kennedy, was sent to a secret meeting with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. Picture it. Two men representing superpowers on the brink of annihilation, in a conversation that would define humanity's future. There, in that room, the hidden truth of the negotiation was finally revealed. Robert Kennedy conveyed the public promise that the United States would not invade Cuba, but added the missing piece, the irresistible offer. He gave his word that the American Jupiter missiles, obsolete but symbolically important, located in Turkey on the Soviet border, would be removed. It would not be an immediate or public trade, but it would happen in a few months, discreetly. That was the Silver Bridge, the masterstroke that allowed Khrushchev to go home not as a leader who backed down, but as a hero who forced the enemy to remove a direct threat to his country. Now let me go deeper, because the impact of that decision transcends history. That secret handshake represents the culmination of the entire journey. It was the final transformation from brute force confrontation to an exercise in psychological intelligence. It showed that in the most critical decisions, real victory is not crushing the opponent, but creating a scenario in which everyone can leave with dignity intact. This mindset is what separates amateur players from master strategists. They understood that peace was more valuable than pride, and that to achieve it, the adversary needed not only a way out, but an honorable way out. The final revelation about the Turkey deal, kept secret for years, is definitive proof that the most important negotiations are those that account for the other side's emotional and political needs. If building a silver bridge for your opponent to resolve a conflict feels powerful, write in the comments, "the honorable exit." That secret handshake not only saved the world, it also left us a manual for navigating the most critical decisions of our own lives. That manual is not written on paper, but in the acts of courage and psychological intelligence we have seen. The first great lesson is the art of creating the third door. In any crisis, personal or professional, our mind tends toward tunnel vision and shows us only two exits: fight or flee, attack or yield. Kennedy showed that the true masters of strategy reject this false dichotomy. They pause, breathe, and search for an alternative no one else is seeing, like the quarantine. That third door mindset is what generates the biggest transformations. The second lesson, drawn directly from that bold bet, is the power of narrative control. Just as his team chose to ignore the aggressive letter and answer the conciliatory one, we can choose which messages to engage in our own negotiations. By focusing on points of agreement and amplifying them, you invite the other side onto your field of play, a field where a solution is possible. The impact of that choice is enormous. Finally, the most powerful lesson of all, the hidden truth behind that secret handshake. You must build a silver bridge. Never corner your opponent. Always offer a way out that preserves their dignity. That is not weakness. It is the peak of strategic intelligence, because it recognizes that for you to win, the other side does not need to be annihilated. Now let me go deeper, because these three lessons form a system, a new way to approach decisions. They teach us that the path to a solution is not a straight line, but a creative process. They reveal that the most effective power is not the one imposed by force, but the one that persuades through intelligence. This mindset does not apply only to presidents and generals. Think about your work, your family, your projects. How many conflicts could have been resolved not with more pressure, but with a third door? How many arguments could have ended better if you had built a silver bridge instead of trying to win at any cost? That is the true revelation of this story. If at least one of these three lessons opened your mind to a new way of thinking, write in the comments, the third door. These are not just tactics. They are principles of a higher and more sustainable form of power based on understanding the human mind. That understanding of the human mind is exactly what enabled the final move, the most sophisticated of the entire journey. The secret agreement. Consider its impact. While the world saw only the tip of the iceberg, the promise not to invade, the real salvation unfolded behind the scenes in a gentleman's pact. The removal of the missiles from Turkey was the materialization of the Silver Bridge. It was the decision that allowed Khrushchev not only to retreat, but to retreat with a victory to present to his people. Kennedy did not need the glory of public humiliation. He needed peace. To get it, he was willing to give his adversary the trophy he required. This is one of the most important revelations about the nature of power. True strength does not lie in taking everything, but in the wisdom to know what to cede to reach the higher goal. That mindset of exchange, of mutual gain, even in a context of total conflict, is what separates amateur decisions from high-level decisions. It was a complete transformation of Cold War logic, even if only for a few days. Now let me go deeper, because this story shows us a hidden truth about ourselves. The ability to resist pressure, to think with empathy, to control the narrative and to build honorable exits is not a gift reserved for presidents. It is a skill that can be cultivated. It is a strategic mindset we can apply in our own lives. The legacy of the missile crisis is not only humanity's survival, but the potential inside each of us to navigate our moments of crisis with more intelligence, grace, and strength. The same psychological architecture that avoided apocalypse is available to you now, to redesign the outcomes of your negotiations, to resolve conflicts, and to build stronger, more productive relationships. The impact you can generate begins with this inner transformation. If this journey through the backstage of power inspired you, write in the comments Master Mindset. The hidden truth in the end is that your ability to change your world does not lie in the strength of your hands, but in the architecture of your mind. The definitive proof of that mental architecture came in a breathtaking moment when the Soviet ships, loaded with nuclear material and approaching the quarantine line, stopped and turned back. In that instant, there were no explosions and no victory speeches, only the tense silence of a world that had just been saved from itself. The crisis revealed a hidden truth about power. Supreme strength is not the ability to push the button, but the discipline and the courage not to. It is the genius of transforming a confrontation headed toward mutual destruction into a sophisticated exercise in strategic influence. That was the great transformation. The confrontation ceased to be about who had the most powerful missiles and became about who had the most resilient mindset and the smartest strategy. The impact of those behind-the-scenes decisions still echoes today, teaching us that the leader's true journey, the negotiator's true journey, the journey of anyone who holds influence, is the internal battle against the primitive impulses to attack, to react in anger, to seek victory at any cost. Now let me go deeper, because this story is the definitive proof that the most effective tools we possess are invisible. The ability to pause under pressure, the skill to decode what the other side needs, the creativity to invent solutions no one had considered before. These are the revelations this crisis left us. Persuasion engineering is not about manipulation. It is about understanding. Strategic influence is not about domination. It is about creating scenarios in which the desired results become the logical and even desirable choice for everyone involved. The power of not pressing the button is, in essence, the power to control yourself before trying to control the situation. When you master that inner power, the external world becomes far easier to navigate. If you end this journey convinced that the greatest weapon of all is a well-trained mind, write in the comments, "Power is in the pause." Building that mental discipline, that ability to see what others do not, is exactly what allows us to turn crises into opportunities. That ability to transform crises into opportunities is exactly where this epic story from the highest halls of power meets your life today. In the end, this was not just a lesson about politics or history. It was a journey through the backstage of the psychology of power. A clear demonstration that strategic empathy, emotional control, and the architecture of honorable exits are in fact more powerful and more impactful than any missile. The greatest revelation of all is that these tools are not exclusive to presidents or generals. They are yours. Think about that salary negotiation you are postponing, that family conflict that seems unsolvable, or that career decision that could define your future. In each of those moments, you are in your own Oval Office, facing your own internal hawks, urging you to react with brute force or to give up entirely. The hidden truth is that the same mindset that saved the world can guide you in those moments. The ability to pause, to understand the other side's perspective, and to create a third door is your secret superpower. Now, let me go deeper, because what we are discussing here is a fundamental transformation in how you see yourself in the world. Not as a victim of circumstances, but as the architect of your decisions and therefore of your results. Understanding the human mind, beginning with your own, is what allows you to navigate this journey with more confidence and effectiveness. It is what allows you to turn the fear of decision into an opportunity for strategy. What Kennedy and his team did on a global scale, you have the opportunity to do on your personal scale every day. The impact you can create in your environment, in your career, and in your relationships depends directly on your ability to apply these same principles. It is about ceasing to be only a piece on the board and becoming the player. If you finish this journey feeling you now have access to a new arsenal of mental tools, write in the comments, "The superpower is mine." In the end, the person you become is the sum of the critical decisions you had the courage and wisdom to make. If you have reached this point in our conversation, it is because this journey of discovery truly resonated with you. We went deep into the backstage of one of history's most critical decisions, and I thank you for staying with me at every step. If this reflection brought you a new perspective or a spark of inspiration, leaving your like on this video is the most genuine way for me to know we are connected and that this content had a real impact. And of course, if you want to keep developing this mindset, decoding the psychology behind other great strategies, and building your own arsenal of influence tools, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. That way you join our community and never lose the thread of our next conversation. So I can have the honor of knowing you stayed with me until the very last second. Leave a comment below with the phrase, "To the end for strategy." It will be amazing to recognize the true strategists in our audience. To keep our momentum, there is a video on screen right now that is the perfect next step for this discussion. Click it and let us continue the conversation. A big hug and see you in the next video.